So I watched the Netflix special, John Mulaney, or as Dan likes to call him, James Mulvaney, and it was remarkable because he was incredibly honest about some stuff that I would deem pretty personally embarrassing.
Addiction, the embarrassment of being an addict since 14 or 13 years old.
Yeah, and but the way he described his intervention was just, I was in tears. I was laughing at his pain, but just the idea of him rebelling against the idea that these people are going to tell me that I have a problem.
Sober Fred Armisen not cracking jokes.
That's what he said. The hardest part was for them was that they're all comedians, but they have to do this, and they're not allowed to do any bits. They told each other beforehand, we're not going to do any bits, because if we do, then it's going to lessen the venom of what this thing is supposed to be. He showed up an hour and a half late because he went to go buy some Coke before he went to the intervention.
And get a haircut at SNL.
He didn't know the intervention was coming,
No,
did he?
no,
So
no.
he didn't know it was an hour and a half before the intervention.
Had he known, he would have been forever late.
Right.
Yeah. He said, and the other thing he said, if they had wanted me to get there on time, they should have just said, we have Coke. And then I would have been there punctually.
Pete Davidson among those who reached out to him. I didn't love the special. You're commending him for it was okay.
I really liked it.
I liked it a lot.
Most people are going to applaud him and this, but when you celebrate him for uncommon honesty around the shame of addiction, I was also craving, and this is his right. Hey, what happened to your reputation tanking because Olivia Munn and you ended up being together and it also wrecked your marriage? You stayed away from that one while being uncommonly honest, telling the intervention stories that I've heard you tell before, because this is not, he was sharpening that material around the country, so that's not the first time I've heard him.
That's every comic, though. Every special is like that.
He did kind of touch on that when he was sharing a story about pawning a Rolex because he was trying to steal his own money because he had a financial advisor and a doctor kind of overseeing his transactions. And he told this really embarrassing story about how he pawned off a Rolex several hours after.
5 minutes.
Yeah,
5 minutes. He
yeah,
said
yeah.
$12,000 he bought it for and sold it for $6,000.
I'll be down there. In 3 minutes, you rush down 7th Avenue to get to this.
I hate that we're laughing about this.
But the punchline of the joke, the punchline of that whole bit is, and those are the stories that I'm willing to tell you. And it's kind of a tip of the hat to, I'm not willing to tell you what happened with the dissolution of my marriage and what happened with Olivia, because I do believe Olivia wasn't – I seen word out there that Olivia was part of the intervention.
Well, Mike, the other thing is he does touch graze again on it earlier. He says, how do you mess up a career and a marriage? And like he said that, but he didn't get into any detail.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of meat on the bone, and he can always address that in a future special. All in all, it was very honest and it was very funny, and it's kind of everything that I had hoped for in this specific special, his return to stand-up, addressing what happened in his personal life.
That also might be out of respect to his now ex-wife, right? Like who was the butt of so many jokes in his initial stand-up. Like their relationship was what he did, and now he's in this position where it's like, I'll poke fun at myself and my addiction and how I hurt myself, not the people I hurt in the response. But I thought the way that he crafted all of it was really sort of a genius balancing act of, I'm giving you enough to where you now view me entirely differently than you did walking into this special, but also I'm not necessarily exposing anybody else's issues.
That's an excellent point by Jeremy. After all he's put, just saying the public eye, not even to mention the hell that might be her private life, there might have been a conversation. I am not your bit. Like, do not make this a bit.
Everything said there by you guys is totally fair, but his reputation hit isn't because of the drugs. It's not because of the addiction. He and Olivia Munn's reputation hit are because of what happened in the marriage. But you are right. He is entitled to choose whatever material he chooses to profit off in comedy. And David, when you say, I feel uncomfortable laughing about this, he's a comedian. He did a special so that we could laugh about it.
I don't agree with the difference we're making between addiction and affairs and marriage. So maybe this is just me with experience or me coming out of the sports world. But I don't think that getting people to an intervention by saying we have drugs, I don't find that compelling or funny or interesting. Having someone criticize someone because of affairs when that's all I've been surrounded by my entire life. And it's not something that, to me, goes to the character of the person. It's not an addiction. It is not something that stops you from doing your job. I never understood why Steve Phillips, which is a callback, a crazy name, had to lose his job as GM of the Mets because he cheated on his wife. The fact that they had an affair and that they're married, they're not married, they have kids. We have such an interest in our society about this. It's so oversized and out of proportion that I would like to focus on the drug side, which is a far bigger problem in a marriage, in a relationship, being a parent, being an employer, being an employee. That crushes a lot more lives than when you decide that you're ready to not be married or to fool around with
you should
someone else.
watch the special because that's exactly Mulaney's approach
It's all about
to all.
it's all about the drugs.
Yeah.
And so why you're saying, I thought, I may have misheard you because I was distracted by Amin. I thought what you were saying is that you were thinking that it was the affair that caused all the issues, not the drugs.
I am saying that where his reputation was harmed the most and where Olivia Munn took a reputation hit, it was not the drugs. It was,
Dan.
I mean, it was the home wrecking.
No.
Olivia,
Not Olivia Munn. I'm talking about Mulaneys.
That he
hit?
left his family and his wife. And I'm telling you, that it was not the drugs. The idea. Now, I find it shocking, too. I don't know what I'm doing here, that someone who looks like that would be addicted to cocaine from the age of 13 or 14 years old. Like, that was not something. His demeanor, his delivery, all of that stuff. For some reason, I didn't think cocaine addiction there because of the packaging.
That's part of his entire bit. So he has a bit where he in one of his earliest stand-ups where he says that he used to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, which is probably surprising because I look like someone who was sitting in a closet for 28 years, eating saltines, and then walked out and started speaking to you. Like that's his whole thing. And I actually think, like, you're right. The relationship was part of the sort of reputational issues that he had, and obviously Olivia Munn ended up getting the brunt of that. But part of it was really because he did have this sort of pristine look, as his stand-up was about, I am past drug abuse, like talking about drug abuse as a past thing, while we're finding out he was really on a lot of drugs as he's telling us those jokes.
And I think the most genius aspects of Mulaney's special is when he uses that to his advantage. And he highlights, how did you not know I was on drugs? Here is an old interview that I gave to GQ. This person is on so many drugs. How did you not see this?
Him reading it verbatim and the answers to some of the questions. And it's like, how did the writer must have known and just said, the hell with it. We're putting it out there.
He closed his special basically reading a GQ interview right before that intervention that was totally nonsensical and ridiculous and unhinged, and it shouldn't have been printed because it made no sense what he was doing. Because
it starts off with, I just walked by a haunted house. Like, it's crazy. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed to hear that you didn't like it all that much because I think it's right up there in the pantheon of recent comedy specials, and it might be my favorite Mulaney special.
No, I am not. I am saying I did not love it. I am saying that I didn't spend a lot of time laughing out loud at what it is that he was doing. Of course, he's a craftsman. Of course, the skill of stand-up is amazing, indisputably. And it speaks to the power, not that Donald Trump didn't already do this, of a white man in a suit, that I am jarred by that kind of drug use.
That's
also
the
his joke.
But Roy, like, he uses that to his advantage. Like, that is the large punchline of this all. It's like white privilege.
And you're the one who
of his
said
initial specials. Like, it was the punchline of his initial specials.
I just can't imagine, Dan, what you're doing here, because you said the GQ article, and I'm coming from a place of ignorance on this, so I'm not saying I know it all. Didn't see the special.
You really have to.
Didn't read the GQ article.
You have to.
But the GQ article was before the special. And you read that saying, how could they even print that? And then you said, I can't even imagine someone who looks like him was on drugs. Which one is it?
No. It's not on drugs. It's I'm copping to the packaging, making it so that I didn't have him doing drugs from 13 years old. That he tricked me with some of the packaging as a stand-up comic. There's not a stand-up comic who looks like that. period.
And
There's
you've never been tricked before by someone doing drugs or by someone having affairs or by someone doing all these things?
Sure, what's your point?
I'm saying that why is it matter what he looks like? Why is that such a focus?
I'm just telling you that in his particular case, the drug use paired against how it is that he was packaging himself. The optics were something that made me not imagine that he had that kind of addiction from his early teens.
This is where David not watching much of Mulaney's work hurts him in this, because it is irrefutably part of the gambit when you go see John Mulaney, his presentation. And when you hold that in stark contrast to what his personal life is, it actually makes a great creative sandbox for this special.
And that he's wife guy. So like going into this, that was also part of it, and part of why, Dan, I imagine your response was like, I needed to hear more about this part of the reputational hit, because so much of his stand-up was almost the sort of Jerry Seinfeld observational comedy, and here's my relationship with my wife and our dog. And so for him to now have to basically find his way to say, no, I'm not past the drug abuse. In fact, I was doing all of these drugs all of this time, and it's the reason my entire life and my relationship fell apart, but I'm going to make you laugh over it. I thought the balance in that was just sensational.
You loved it, right? I mean,
I thought it was incredible. I enjoyed it. And to kind of highlight what everyone's saying about what kind of comedian he is, he starts off by noticing there's a 10-year-old in the audience.
I thought that was a plant.
Maybe it was.
It was a plant. So this is the part that's cool. He did that crowd work with that exact kid at a random, as he was crafting the stand-up and he was doing these club shows. And that kid was there, and he started implementing that crowd work with young kids in whatever audience he was in, and then flew that kid out from the original crowd work to be at the
Does it
special.
bother you when that happens?
No, that's
The
pretty.
plants?
That's no, not when it's done like that. That's pretty cool.
How else are plants done?
Just say, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you bring your kid? And then that's kind of lazy. But if it came out of somewhere organic and said, I like that content, I want to recreate it, because that's really what stand-up is recreating the same routine over and over. That's when Dan said, well, he's done this before. I'm like, well, Dan, that's every televised special. They've all done it before.
Well, you say that, but I do remember the documentary comedian that I've recommended several times on this show, and Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld are simply marveling, because they sculpt every word, knowing where the laughs are. Unfortunately, the guy they were marveling at, Bill Cosby.